Here are just another example of some of the plates that are the transition points that are still in place today. Now, these blue markers are earthquakes that have occurred in the last 50 years. If you have grew up like I did, assuming that California is a state that's in total sin and God's going to judge it and have it fall off into the ocean one day.
I get your wish.
I think you're laughing because I'm assuming you're probably, I'm not the only one that heard that. But this plate right here is still, has not erupted. It's the only place in this region that has not had an earthquake, should I say, in the past 50 years. So it's out there. It's sitting there in front of us. But one of the other things that I thought was intriguing was Iceland. The Mid-Atlantic Ridge actually goes through Iceland. And the little red triangles are current day volcanoes. But Iceland itself is a dormant volcano. The island was created by volcanic activity. If you've ever been to Bermuda, what are you going to say, Doug?
No, go ahead. I just wanted to interject something, but go finish your point.
I was going to say Bermuda is another one, volcanic activity that formed. Hawaiian Islands formed by volcanoes. The tallest mountain in the world is actually a volcano that's in the ocean, taller than Mount Everest. What are you going to say, Doug?
About 7 or 8 years ago, the United States almost lost a nuclear submarine off Guam, and they were submerged. The volcanoes in the Pacific Ring of Fire are still growing, and the submarine, it was uncharted. They're supposed to take sonar readings, frequently, and they did. But this volcano had popped up and grew, and the sub hit it, and one man was killed on the sub, and the submarine came within 1 inch of total loss. The front pressure bulkhead came within 1 inch of being ruptured, and the submarine was totaled. And
Yeah.
I don't know if it was about 7 or 8 years ago. I actually knew a father of one of the sons that was a lieutenant on that ship. He was pretty severely injured, but they're still growing out there. That's what my point was.
But because I assume previous charts would have the volcano at one size,
Yeah.
and as you come back through later,
Yep, it
it's
grew.
even bigger.
Yeah.
So you still have this activity still going on. Yes, Mike?
You're talking about, how peaceful the picture we have of the ark and things like that. That would be like, having a nice pretty picture of Christ on the cross. It was a violent, excruciating death that people witnessed. So I don't think that Noah was unaffected by the ark. I'm sure it was very violent.
Yeah.
And to the point to where, he wasn't removed from the judgment. He was in the middle of it. And just like Christ, he was in the middle of judgment, but the Bible says we were crucified with Christ. We were there being judged as well. So Noah really didn't escape the judgment. He just, God allowed him, gave him a provision through that judgment.
In essence, the ark served as his means of salvation to the post-flood world.
Correct. But you have to believe that Noah was even in shock as to how violent and just, I'm sure that God wanted to project his majesty to Noah, even being inside the ark, to where he could understand what was going on outside.
Short of supernatural, what did you do to get ready for it? What life skill do you pull off of to get ready for a global flood?
And you also realize not only that, but his grace. How merciful and gracious.
Yeah.
I mean, he must have been in that heart thinking to himself, I deserve it. How am I any different than any of these other folks? I'm a sinful person as well.
Whether the scriptures they don't say much about it, but you would assume that some of this has got to resonate with him.
Yeah.
That he's got to be pondering these kinds of thoughts. Why am I here? What's going on? The intensity of what's going on, God's judgment being displayed here, and his mercy and grace being extended to me.
You wonder if Noah got drunk during the ark. No, this was going on because he was a drunk.
We know he did afterwards. We know he did afterwards. All right, the balance of 7:11 talks about the windows, which should be described here as the lattice kind of looking through from the atmosphere, the heavens being opened up, and it's just, again, we're looking at two things that are really tied together here in this one verse. Something under the earth's crust has happened, and it has been in conjunction with rain falling from the sky. And so we have water moving horizontally as well as vertically down upon the earth's surface. And again, this is really what we build our model off of how we view what I term catastrophic plate tectonics. It's not just plate tectonics where they're moving slowly, but catastrophic where they're being forced apart by a flood. Then we move into the next group of verses here, and we see that the time frame of this initial flood period was 40 days and 40 nights, just typical 40 days. We see the description of the animals being brought onto the ark according to their kind. If you remember, we talked about that early on in Genesis chapter 1, as God brought life into existence, but he did so according to its kind, which we can see variety and range of unique characteristics within one kind. As we talked about the dogs, they have uniqueness about them, but they're all dogs. And so there was a certain segment of kind that came onto the ark. And we see the description here of, in Genesis 7, all livestock, every creeping thing, every bird, every winged creature, and Noah and his family. What's missing from the list?
Fish.
The fish. And so the fish would have survived outside of the ark, to whatever it means. Certainly many of them would have been buried in the Genesis flood as well, because we have fossils of fish in different places across the world. But they would have survived outside of the boat. And we see that the Lord closed the door. And certainly once that door was closed, there was not going to be any opening it until God opened it again. Which is really speaking to what you gentlemen were talking about. And I see this picture here that God seals our salvation. There isn't something that we can lose. There's no getting away from it. There's no even desiring, obviously, to get away from it. But Noah was not going to escape the boat until God had deemed it time for him to come out.
What are your thoughts on the plant life trees and all that? Is that the seeds just float around for a while and then?
I think there would be two things. One is they certainly would bring food on for the animals. So if there was anything left over, they could have utilized that. But in general, I would say it's just whatever was left in the water or floating. I may have mentioned a few weeks ago about some floating log mats. And this will kind of answer maybe a couple of questions, is when you think about the water coming and stripping off the top layers of the Earth's surface, you've got all these trees and vegetation. The Creation Museum up in Kentucky has a drawing where you've got the ocean water here, but in the middle of this ocean water is kind of this floating island. Forgive me for the crudeness of my trees and plants and shrubbery, but in essence, animals would be able to be on this floating island. And so it might preserve some of the seeds, as well as after the flood, some of the animals could have gotten on this floating island. Because what Darwin recognized when he went to Galapagos Island is he saw tortoises, he saw lizards that were similar to what he'd seen in other places in the world, but they were slightly different. And so he began to think, well, this is evolution. And all I would say is it's genetic variation within a created kind. But how do you get these iguana lizards? You know, they're not exactly good guys to be traveling across the planet. You know, they need some help. And I believe this floating log mat would provide a good mechanism for that to occur.
You talked about, was there any way Noah could open the door? And I like to also say that there was no way he could close it. Because if the proportions of the ark are anything like what you have suggested, it would be impossible even for 8 people to close the door that massive, under that amount of weight. And I'm sure they're scratching their head thinking, I wonder how in the world we get this door closed.
I
Had to be
think,
the Lord.
yeah, and you're right, physically, but I think it's included here in this Genesis 7 text. It says, and God closed the door. I think that's beyond, that's saying more than the people couldn't do it themselves,
Correct.
physically. There's a deeper meaning that resonates there. As we move in through the chapter a little bit further, waters increased, bore up the ark as it rose high above the earth. Waters prevailed and increased greatly on the earth. Waters prevailed so mightily on the earth that all the high mountains were covered, covering them 15 cubits deep, which is close to 30 feet. Is there any reason to think that the flood did not cover the entire earth? Is there anything in that text that says, maybe it didn't get the whole earth? Because as much as you may say, well, no, duh, Tommy, that's obvious. The gap theory, which we talked about several weeks ago, the gap theory is a theory that it introduces long ages into the week of creation. The gap theory says that between verse 1 and verse 2, there were millions and millions of years. And within that time period, what occurred was that Satan was cast out of heaven to earth. The earth was destroyed by a global flood. That's where we get our dinosaur fossils. And then we move into verse 2 and everything starts again. And there were some who accept that idea that that's when the global flood occurred. And so when we get to Genesis 7, they believe that the flood was a local flood. And I don't see there's any way possible. In fact,
We'd have to throw out all of this.
exactly.
I mean, there's no way, I mean, it's very catastrophic in its wording.
But there are some very significant theologians
Huh.
who hold to a local flood
Wow.
view. Because they have taken the global flood and put it into the week of creation. In fact, an artist with Answers in Genesis came up with this. This is how a local flood would look based on the description in Scripture. Now, I've never seen water actually do this.
Once on the Red Sea.
Once on the Red Sea, yes. But God said He did that one, didn't He?
Yeah.
And so you recognize how, ultimately, in my estimation, how ludicrous the position is that this description means anything other than the waters cover the entire planet.
Well, didn't it even say, and Tommy, I don't have my Bible in front of me, someone was reading that passage, it said, like, and I got the gist of this, you can tell me if it's wrong, even your theory of the land animals, it's not like all of them were killed unless you were on the ark.
Exactly.
If you, I mean, so
Yes.
I don't even know if that one, like, it sounds like it killed
This is
all.
post-flood. This would be post.
Oh, I gotcha.
The animals on
I,
here
how they
came
got,
off the
I
ark.
gotcha, okay,
Yes,
okay,
thank you for the
okay.
clarification.
So I guess I've read it several times, but it never came as powerful as it did when someone was just reading it. It was like, no, don't even think something survived somewhere else. I did it all and I killed everything. Only salvation was through that ark, just like salvation is only through my son. It almost gives you a parallel of,
Exactly.
of only salvation through Jesus Christ. Is the only salvation in that world was through the ark.
Yeah.
And how those kind of parallel, that kind of.
Yeah, this is the means by which
That's it. Yeah,
salvation
don't
will come.
think something got away with
Which
it.
really speaks to the totality of God's judgment. We're not just arguing, did the flood waters cover the entire planet, but we're asking is, in the totality of even of God's judgment, how should we even view that? Mike?
It's kind of like going to the beach and looking out the horizon of the water and saying, I can see the whole ocean. Well, no, you can't. You can only see as far as your eyes and light is. Now, I can get a telescope and do the same thing. And I got the same image inside the scope as outside. And that's kind of like this. It's the same thinking that the world was flat at one time. And to have a localized flood means you're only seeing that which is local to you, not what's local to everyone on the earth.
You think about the localized flood. Now I told you last week that the ark was probably 500 feet long, 3 stories, had over 2 million, I think, square feet or cubic feet of space. what was Noah doing building a boat that big if it was a local flood? Why didn't God just move the animals away? I mean, do you need a boat to maintain, or just float around the lake? I mean, again, we all, I think, are saying the same thing, but it's just an inconsistency in how we interpret Scripture, and that's some of the battles we face even within Christian circles.
Do you think, Tommy, too, I always wonder why, I'm trying to guess what God's doing, which is stupid. Like, God could have just repopulated the earth with animals. Let's say, okay, I'm judgment, boom, I'll make new animals. But for some reason, he wanted the ark and the whole business of the ark. Was that even to give maybe some people, like if I was in a town near Noah and I saw all these animals coming through town, I'd go, this is something going on. Was that like a second chance of maybe salvation? I don't know. You know, I've always wondered.
Are you saying, why did he
Yeah,
not just
why-
create a whole new group of animals?
Right, why, I mean, is there some, maybe I'm trying to do some cosmic meaning into the ark, and it really came through, which was a terrible movie and wasn't godly movie, the one with, what's his face? Yeah,
Steve
you know who I'm
Carell,
talking
Steve Carell, yeah.
But if I was in the town, these elephants were coming through, I would go, what's going on over here? This is cosmic, or this is something from God. I would at least gone, I'm going to give this guy a benefit. Like, why the, you know what, I guess I'm not asking the question.
No, I
right.
think you're asking it about, and I think you already have the answer too. Because what I'm going to close with tonight, no, take that back, I've changed it. Matthew 24, Jesus is talking to his disciples, and they're asking him about his return. And he says to them, so as it was in the days of Noah, so shall my return be. And he says, in that point, in the days of Noah, they were eating and marrying and drinking and doing life. And what I'm saying is, I think people just do what they do, and whether it's God blinding them or their unwillingness to see. You sit here because you have perspective with what you're saying. You get to look back and say, I see the story, I see the message, I get it. Why didn't they get it? And I'm saying,
Right, sure.
they're walking around like this.
Yeah.
And I think this is the point of what Jesus is saying, even within that Matthew 24 passage. That's the way people were living then, and that's the way people are living today. We can all sit here and talk about a coming return of Jesus Christ and a final destruction, and we all believe it, but we don't even really function that way in our lives.
Yeah, sure.
Well, and the thing about it is, I'm sure that God didn't tell Noah, I'm going to save you and your family, and by the way, don't tell anybody else what's going on. I'm sure he went out and told as many people as he could, hoping to think that, you know, we can take all these people with us.
There is that possibility. We do have Noah set aside as a righteous man, so at least God chose to work through him specifically.
Correct.
Yes, sir?
Well, I was just going to mention his grandfather Methuselah.
Yes.
And Methuselah's name was, at his death it will come. So the reason why they were scoffing and not doing it is because Methuselah died and there were 7 days of mourning. So they were all scoffing because Methuselah's dead and look, nothing happened. So what God allowed the 7 days of mourning, and then the expanse opened, and that's what happened. So those are scoffers of yesteryear and today.
Sure.
We're going to have.
That's the same thing with.
Still the world we walk in.
Yeah, because I mean, we can talk about, you know, Jesus, like you said, in a coming judgment. You know, there's one destiny or the other, and people, you know, God says no man has any excuse. So it's like they know, they choose not to see. And it's the same way it was then.
And it's the blindness of fallen humanity.
Sure.